Hi everyone. Today's theme is how to overcome low context culture interview. John-san, thank you very much for joining this video today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being a guest.
Thank you. So, John-san, please could you introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So, as you know, my name is John McGraw, and I'm a business English coach, and I help Japanese professionals improve their English communication skills so they can thrive in global and multinational companies and work abroad and live abroad effectively.
Okay, so you are currently living in Canada?
I do, yes. I live in Toronto, Canada, right now.
And you have been in Japan before?
I have. I lived, in fact, in Saitama for several years and lived in, and I also worked in Tokyo for a number of years. So I have some familiarity with the culture, of course, in Japan, and a strong connection to Japan as well.
I see. So your customer, I guess, many of them are Japanese?
That is correct, yes. In fact, I focus exclusively on Japanese clients, most of them based in Japan currently. So as you can imagine, my business is mainly online.
I see. All right, thank you very much. So today's theme is how to overcome low context culture interview. So first of all, can you quickly explain what is low context and high context?
Yes, that's a very good question. So low context and high context is about the styles of communication. So in a high context environment, which is Japan is a high context environment, communication is less direct because relationships and trust are important. So not much has to be said because there's a deep understanding between people in high context environments. Now, low context environments are kind of the opposite. Some typical countries are the United States and Canada and many English-speaking countries. In these countries, the communication is clearer and more direct, and results in business results are more important than establishing relationships and trust. So for someone who's from a high context culture, low context communication may seem very direct, maybe too strong, and maybe a little rude.
Yeah, I think this conversation is really interesting. For example, in Japan, we say 空気を読む.
Yes.
読む is very difficult, I think, for people who is in a low context culture.
It is, and that's one of the difficult transitions for people from low context cultures coming into countries like Japan, because it is very different and they're not used to that kind of understanding.
Thank you very much. As you know, recently, lots of foreigners are working in Japan, and Japanese, we have more opportunity to work together. I think this low context and high context society or communication is really important to understand having a communication with those people. So my question is there any communication difference in the work environment?
Yes, there are some very significant differences in the communication styles. So as you know, in a high context culture like Japan, it's very common to wait for your turn to speak, and silence is a very important part. Sometimes what isn't said is more important than what is said. So that's one thing that's very different. Whereas in low context, there's a lot of speaking, and especially in countries like the United States or people from the United States and Canada, silence is considered bad. So for Japanese who are in a more low context environment, if they wait for their turn to speak and if they try to use silence, they may not get an opportunity to speak because the low context communicators tend to just take whatever opportunity they can. So for a Japanese working in a more low context environment, they need to be more direct and speak more confidently and take opportunities to speak instead of waiting for their turn. I'd say that's one difference. In the cases of being a manager, for a Japanese manager with employees from a low context culture, there's also an importance to be direct. So we can take an example of an American employee and a Japanese manager. If the American employee makes a suggestion on a project, for example, and the Japanese manager doesn't like it, the Japanese manager might say something like, "Oh, that might be difficult." Now, as you know, probably the true meaning is don't do it. And if the employee was Japanese, they would understand that right away. But to someone like an American from a low context culture, they wouldn't understand that. They would hear it might be difficult and they might think, oh, the manager says it might be difficult, so it's a challenge, so I should go do it, which is the exact opposite of what the manager wants.
Yeah. As a Japanese manager, managing foreigners, I have that kind of experience. It's a little bit hard for Japanese to read directly or giving that kind of direct word at the beginning.
Yes, I imagine you had to do a lot of adaptation in communication styles, right? And that's exactly it, of course. Ideally, the manager needs to find a way to get more comfortable with being more direct. And it's not necessarily considered rude. It's just a case of being more comfortable in saying exactly and what you want. And hopefully clarification will go both ways. And the low communication employee can also adjust as well.
Yeah, Johnson, thank you very much. That's really interesting.